Hi class, welcome to the lecture on the social process and control theories of crime. This week's online lecture is going to coincide with chapter 10 of Scram and Tibbets. There are several learning objectives which you will find in their text, but most importantly what I want you guys to take away from this online lecture and from this week's chapter is to make sure that you can articulate and that you understand differential association theory, social bond theory, low self-control, otherwise known as the general theory of crime. These are three very important theories in the realm of criminology. So let's go ahead and get started. So early socialization usually occurs within the family. During this stage, children start learning how to behave. Ideally, they learn what behavior is appropriate when at home and in public. Socialization also takes place later on in life and outside the family context. So as individuals grow older, other influential agents of socialization can become school and their peers. Then later on the workplace, then the community and religious organizations and countless other entities also contribute to the socialization process of an individual. So most people who have no understanding of the theories within criminology do understand, however, that socialization is important and possibly connected to how one behaves later on in life. So it is well known, for instance, that broken homes, poor parental control, and child abuse and neglect often lead to certain problems. For example, a child who suffers repeated abuse may be inclined to abuse his or her children in adulthood. Even if one is fortunate enough to grow up in a full functional family, other outside factors like being bullied in school or ridiculed in the workplace can possibly contribute to inappropriate behavior. So what does this mean? People are influenced by numerous sources, which is why it's useful to examine the role of socialization in criminal behavior. Theories that claim socialization is linked to criminal activity are known as social process theories, hence the title of this week's lesson and chapter. Social process theories examine how individuals interact with other individuals and groups. These theories focus carefully on how behavior is learned, internalized, and transmitted between individuals. So we're first going to discuss learning theories and what are learning theories. So these are theories that attempt to explain how and why individuals learn criminal rather than conforming behavior. Learning theorists believe that individuals are socialized in criminal behavior. For example, these theories are going to argue that delinquent peers may contribute to a person's decision to violate the law. And then we have what we term as control theories. And control theories are going to focus on social or personal factors that prevent individuals from engaging in selfish, antisocial behaviors. So let's go ahead and get started with the learning theories. So we're going to review theories that explain the social process of how and why individuals engage in criminal behavior through learning. Unlike other theories that assume we're born with offending tendencies, essentially all learning theories assume that our attitudes and behavioral decisions are acquired through communication after we're born. Therefore, it's going to assume that individuals enter the world with a blank slate. So learning theories seek to explain how criminal and non-criminal behavior is learned through cultural values, people internalize, and acquaintances that they're going to make. Now, a key feature of learning theories is recognizing the influence of peers and significant others on an individual's behavior. Now, when I say significant others, I don't mean husband and wife or boyfriend and girlfriend or an intimate relationship. This could be any close relationship like a family member, a close friend, friend of the family, etc. Now, we're going to discuss three theories in this particular section of learning theories, and we're going to start off with the differential association theory. Now, in his third edition of Principles in Criminology, Edwin Sutherland introduced his differential association theory, and he was interested in explaining how criminal values and attitudes could be culturally transmitted from one generation to the next. Now, Sutherland was influenced by Sean McKay's concept of social disorganization, which we discussed last week. He was also influenced by Tard's imitation theory. And as the name suggests, it claims that people are going to imitate one another. Now, Tard came up with three laws of imitation. So the first one being that people imitate one another in proportion as they're in close contact. The second one is going to be that Often the superior is imitated by the inferior. Think of a child imitating the adult. And when two mutually exclusive methods or approaches come together, one method can be substituted for another. Now, Sutherland presented his theory of differential association with 9 specific statements, which are presented to you in this slide. Now, I'm not going to go and read all of them to you. You can pause the video at this point and read through them. And also, Schramm and Tibbets elaborate on these 9 specific statements. Now, when we look at how and when Sutherland coined or came up with his theory, remember, it's always important to look at the cultural context and understand what was going on when theorists came up with their actual theories. So this theory that Sutherland developed, he brought it up in the mid-1900s. So we have to understand what was happening during the mid to 1900s, right? And during that time, most academics and society in general believed that there was something abnormal or different about criminals. So, for example, if you remember Sheldon's body type theory from another week, well, it was popular in the same period of time, and so was the IQ theory, IQ testing, excuse me, to pick out individuals who were of lower intelligence and predisposed to crime. So this theory that was created by Sutherland completely went against those ideas. So the common assumption at the time when Sutherland created the principles of this theory of differential association was that there was something essentially wrong with individuals who committed crime. Now, in light of this common assumption, it was extremely profound, for Sutherland to propose that criminality is actually learned as any conventional activity is learned. He asserted that any normal individual, when exposed to definitions and attitudes favorable toward crime, will learn both the motivations and techniques for engaging in illegal behaviors. In addition, he proposed the idea that various learning mechanisms and processes like social interactions were involved in developing criminality are identical to the learning processes of essentially all conventional activities, things like reading, playing football, or riding a bike. So, almost everyone learns to swim or ride a bike from friends, parents, or teachers. Now, in contrast, almost no one learns how to do these activities from reading a book. Instead, we typically learn the techniques as well as motivations for engaging in such activities from our significant others. So according to Sutherland, crime is learned the same way, which is going to be through interactions with individuals with whom we are close. And from them, we're going to learn both the techniques and the motivations to commit these crimes. Now, there were certain reactions to differential association theory, right? Sutherland's theory has been subjected to significant scrutiny and interpretation. Researchers have been critical on his statements and have also pointed to several misinterpretations of his work. So, for example, some researchers have assumed that Sutherland's theory is concerned only with associations between criminals. But if this were the only relevant type of association, then the theory would be invalid, because some people have an association with criminals but are not considered criminals themselves. Think, for example, police officers, corrections officers, and judges who quite often deal with criminals on a daily basis throughout their work and don't go on to commit or engage in criminal activities. So Sutherland theorized that crime occurs when associations favorable to the violation of the law outweigh associations favorable to conforming to a law. But measuring this ratio and understanding when the balance tips in favor of criminal lifestyle is pretty difficult to measure. It's all but impossible. Now still, some studies have found support for differential association variables, particularly in the area of white-collar crime. For example, there is a recent study that involved a sample of 133 graduate business students, and it found that participants would go against their friends' and professors' opinions and commit corporate crime if they felt that their coworkers and superiors at work agreed with the illegal behavior. So this study found that the influence of associating with people who have different set of values, in this case strong corporate attitudes, on a daily basis can have a powerful effect on criminal decision making. Now, even to the point where individuals will do things they know their family and friends are going to feel are immoral. Now, something else to consider is that Sutherland theorized that criminal associations lead to crime, but that the reverse is plausible. That is, one may commit crime and then seek out individuals with attitudes similar to one's own. And this is similar to, which came first, the chicken or the egg, hence the picture on the slide. And this is going to be an issue of temporal ordering. So do youths learn to commit crime once they start hanging out with delinquent peers, or do the actual youths that commit crime start hanging out with similar like-minded individuals, which is the case of the famous quote, birds of a feather flock together. Now, after a rather lengthy, literary debate between researchers, the most recent research points to the occurrence of both causal processes. So what does this mean? It's going to indicate that criminal associations cause more crime, and committing crime causes more criminal associations. Now, there's another interesting criticism that has been leveled at this theory, and it's the argument that if criminal behavior is learned and people are born with a blank slate, as previously stated, then who first committed crime if no one taught that person the techniques and motives to commit those crimes? Now, other research is supportive of Sutherland's theory. For example, researchers have found that young criminals are quote-unquote tutored by older individuals, that criminals sometimes maintain associations with other criminals prior to their delinquent acts, and that deviant attitudes, friends, and acts are closely connected. Now, unfortunately, many of Sutherland's principles are somewhat vague and cryptic, which does not, lend the theory to be easily tested. Now, perhaps one of the biggest problems with Sutherland's formulation of differential association is that he used primarily one type of learning model, which was what's called classical conditioning, to come up with most of his principles, which neglects, the other important ways we learn attitudes and behavior from the significant others. Lastly, Sutherland was adamant that such learning about how and why to commit crime occurred only through social interaction with significant others and not through media role models, such as those in movies or on the radio. So this is when Daniel Glazer comes in, and he proposed an alternate theory that included the important influence that media can play in behavior. Now, this is what we refer to as the concept of differential identification. So in 1956, Glazer proposed this idea, again, of differential identification, which allows for learning to take place not only through people close to us, but also through other reference groups, even distant ones such as sports heroes or movie stars, whom the individual has never actually met or corresponded with. So this is in 1956. Today, it might be reality TV stars, it might be individuals who have a large social media following, athletes with a large social media following, like the YouTube sensations as well, individuals on Instagram with a lot of followers, etc. Now, Glazer claimed that it did not matter much whether the individual had a personal relationship with the reference group. In fact, he actually claimed that they could even be imaginary, such as fictitious characters in a movie or book. Now, we also have the differential reinforcement theory. Now, this was brought to us by Burgess and Akers, and they both of these individuals criticized and they refined Sutherland's theory in 1966. So the product of this project was what is now known as, again, differential reinforcement theory. And these two researchers argued that by integrating Sutherland's work with contributions from the field of social psychology, most importantly, the learning models of operant conditioning and modeling and imitation, the decisions to commit criminal behavior could be more clearly understood. Now, here we have the propositions made by Burgess and Akers. I'll leave this here for you for a second. You could also pause the video if you want to take a look at this. Now, the first proposition clearly states that the essential learning mechanism in social behavior is operant conditioning. Thus, it is vital to understand what operant conditioning is and how it is valid at all times in an individual's life. So I'm actually going to leave this up here as I explain the propositions of differential reinforcement. So this theory may appear in many ways to be no different than the rational choice theory, which we discussed, I believe it was in chapter 4, week 4 of this class. Now, this is true to some extent because both models focus on punishments and reinforcements that occur after an individual offends. Differential reinforcement theory, however, can be distinguished from the rational choice perspective in that it assumes humans are born with an innate capacity for rational decision making. Whereas the differential reinforcement perspective is going to assume that individuals are born with a blank slate, and therefore they must be socialized and taught how to behave through various forms of conditioning, like classical and operant conditioning and modeling. Additionally, differential reinforcement theory is far more deterministic than rational choice theory in the sense that the former assumes that individuals have virtually no free will or free choice, whereas the latter is based almost entirely on the assumption that individuals do indeed have the ability to make their own choices and tend to make calculated decisions based on the contextual circumstances of a given situation. Now, we're going to look at some psychological learning models and, more importantly, operant conditioning, because that is the first principle from the differential reinforcement theory propositions. So, operant conditioning is going to be concerned with how behavior is influenced by reinforcements and punishments. So, operant conditioning assumes that the animal or human is a proactive player in seeking out rewards, not just a passive entity that simply receives some form of stimulus, which is what classical conditioning assumes. So certain behaviors are encouraged through reward, and this is what we coin as positive reinforcement, or through avoidance of punishment, which is what we refer to as negative reinforcement. So for example, if a child is given a toy or video game for doing well on his or her report card, that's going to be a positive reinforcement. On the other hand, if a child who has been confined to his or her room after school for a week for not doing homework is then allowed to start playing with friends again after school because she or he did a good job on homework the following week, this is going to be a negative reinforcement because a child is now being rewarded through the avoidance of something negative. Like different types of reinforcement, punishment also comes in two forms. Therefore, behavior is discouraged or weakened via adverse stimulus. A good example of positive punishment would be putting a child in what's known as timeout, where he or she is forced to sit alone for many minutes, a punishment that tends to be quite effective with young children. So anything that directly presents negative sensations or feelings is a positive punishment, while on the other hand, if parents take away their child's opportunity to go on an outing with friends, think of like, your parents don't let you go, or when you were younger, your parents didn't let you go to the movie theater or whatever the case was with your friends, because let's say you skip school. This is going to be an example of a negative punishment because the parents are removing a positive aspect or reward. Now, a large amount of research has shown that humans learn attitudes and behavior best through a mix of punishments and reinforcements through life. So for example, studies have clearly shown that rehabilitative programs that appear to work most effectively in reducing recidivism in offenders are those that have many opportunities for rewards as well as threats for punishments. So to be clear, empirical studies that have combined the findings from hundreds of studies of rehabilitation programs have demonstrated that the programs that are most successful in changing the attitudes and behavior of previous offenders are those that offer at least 4 reward opportunities for every 1 punishment aspect of the program. So whether it is training children to use the toilet or altering criminals' thinking and behavior, operant conditioning is a well-established form of learning that makes differential reinforcement theory a more valid and specified model of offending than differential association. So that's one of the key objectives here outlined by Schramm and Tibbets. Now, we're going to look at Bandura's theory of imitation and modeling. And what Bandura did was he demonstrated through a series of theoretical and experimental studies that a significant amount of learning takes place absent virtually from any form of conditioning or responses to a given behavior. So according to Bandura, individuals can learn even if they are not punished or rewarded for a given behavior or exposed to associations between stimuli and responses. Instead, Bandura proposed that people learn much of their attitudes and behavior from simply observing the behavior of others, mostly through mimicking others. Now, this type of phenomenon is often referred to as monkey see, monkey do, as you see on your screen. But not just monkeys do this. Social psychological research has clearly established that humans, as well as most animal species, are hardwired to observe and learn the behaviors of others, especially those older in years, to see what behavior is essential for success and survival. Now, just like all the theories, I always mention this, all theories have some criticisms or positive or negative reactions. So the theory has been criticized, and again, I'm discussing differential reinforcement theory. So this theory has been criticized for incorrectly and incompletely applying the principles of operant conditioning. And furthermore, it's been noted that the theory does not adequately address the importance of non-social reinforcement. Non-social reinforcement can be considered self-reinforcement. For example, if someone gets enjoyment out of abusing others, then the person can be considered reinforced through these non-social means. Now, perhaps the most important criticism of differential reinforcement theory is that it appears tautological, which means that the variables and measures used to test its validity are true by definition. So what does this mean? So studies testing this theory have been divided into 4 groups of variables or factors. So associations, reinforcements, definitions, and modeling. So some critics have noted that if individuals who report that they associate with those who offend are rewarded for offending, believe offending is good, and have seen many of their significant others offend, they will be more likely to offend. So in other words, if your friends and their family are doing it, there is little doubt that you will also do it. So for example, critics would argue that a person who primarily hangs out with car thieves knows he will be rewarded for stealing cars, believes stealing cars is good and not immoral, and has observed many respected others stealing cars will inevitably commit auto theft themselves. However, it has been well argued that such criticisms of tautology are not valid because none of these factors necessarily make offending by the respondent true by definition. So I'm going to stop right now and continue with part 2 in a separate video.